You know, every major conflict has a flashpoint, a catalyst, and for the Battle of Uhud, it didn't just start with swords and spears. It started with money. A lot of money. This verse from the Quran really sets the scene for us. We're talking about a war funded by a powerful, desperate group of people, absolutely determined to stop a new faith in its tracks. So just how much wealth are we talking about here? 50,000 gold dinars. That is an incredible fortune. The leaders of the Quraish tribe in Mecca, well, they pooled their resources to fund this massive military campaign. See, this wasn't just some small raid. This was a carefully planned, meticulously funded operation. They were on a total war footing, ready to settle the score after that shocking defeat they suffered at the Battle of Badr. This number, 50,000, tells you everything you need to know about how high the stakes really were.
So why? Why this huge mobilization? Why pour a fortune into another risky battle? Well, the reasons were complicated. It was this powerful mix of religious belief, tribal honor, raw politics, and, maybe most importantly, sheer economic survival.
Let's break it down. The Quraysh really had four big motives driving them. On a religious level, they saw Islam as a fundamental threat to their traditions and their way of life. Societally, they were humiliated at Badr, and they absolutely had to have their revenge. It was a matter of honor. Politically, their position as the top dogs in Arabia was seriously on the line. But the one that was really squeezing them, the most urgent reason, was economic. You have to understand, Mecca wasn't some farming town. It was a city built on commerce, a hub of trade. Its entire economy, its very lifeblood, depended on these two huge caravan journeys. The summer trip heading north to Syria and the winter trip heading south to Yemen. These were the arteries of the city, pumping in the wealth that kept everyone afloat. And this is where you can really see the strategic brilliance of the Muslims in Medina. By controlling the lands north of Mecca, they had cut off that vital summer trade route to Syria completely. The Quraysh were caught in an economic stranglehold, and you could tell they were starting to suffocate. And this quote, wow, it just perfectly captures their desperation. This is Safwan ibn Umayyah, a major Quraysh leader. And this isn't just talk. You can feel the panic in his words. He's basically saying, if we don't fight back, we're going to starve. For the Quraysh, this war wasn't just about ideology anymore. It was about survival. So as the massive Quraysh army marched out of Mecca, full of rage and backed by all that gold, something else was moving much, much faster. A secret, carried by a lone messenger racing through the desert night with a warning that was about to change everything. The secret was in a letter sent by the Prophet's own uncle Al-Abbas, who was still living in Mecca, and it laid out the terrifying size of the enemy force. 3,000 fighters, a huge cavalry with 700 horses, thousands of camels, and they were fully armed to the teeth. This army was 3 times bigger than the one the Muslims had faced at Badr. The Quraysh were clearly not taking any chances this time.
The distance from Mecca to Medina was 500 kilometers.
And the messenger covered that entire distance in just 3 days. I mean, can you imagine? That's an absolutely incredible feat, driven by nothing but sheer urgency. And so, the letter reached the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, right outside Medina. The intelligence was solid. The threat wasn't just real, it was imminent. Now, with this massive army on its way, the Prophet gathers his companions. But here's the thing, he doesn't just issue a command. He calls a council. And what happens next is one of the most important debates in early Islamic history. It's a moment that would define not just the battle itself, but the very meaning of leadership. This was the big question on the table. There were 2 very clear strategies. Do they use the strong fortifications of Medina, their home turf, and fight a defensive battle? Or do they march out and meet this giant army head-on, in the open? Okay, so on one hand, the Prophet's own strategic view was to stay put. It made perfect sense. Medina was basically a fortress. They knew every street, every alleyway, and defending your own home, that's a powerful motivator. But on the other hand, many of the companions, especially the younger guys and those who felt they'd missed out on the honor of fighting at Badr, they were fired up. They wanted to march out. To them, staying inside felt like hiding, and they were desperate for a chance to prove their faith. The final decision the Prophet makes here, well, it's nothing short of a masterclass in leadership that people still talk about today. Think about this. Despite his own sound military judgment, his own gut feeling, He listened to the passionate voices of his companions and agreed to march out. He didn't pull rank, he didn't force his own view. He chose the path of consultation, of shared responsibility. And this incredible act wasn't just some political move. It was a direct application of divine guidance. This verse was actually revealed in the context of Uhud, cementing this principle of shura, or mutual consultation, as a bedrock of the community. He was doing more than just planning a battle. He was training his companions to think, to debate, and to own the results of their collective choices. And this is the timeless lesson for all of us, right? True leadership isn't about always being the smartest person in the room. It's about building a team that's strong enough to make decisions together. It's about empowering people, really listening to them, and then, once a decision is made, moving forward with total trust and resolve. Now, there was a moment when some of the companions had second thoughts. They realized they might have pushed the prophet against his better judgment, and they tried to walk it back. But he came out wearing his armor and gave this powerful response. The decision, made together, was final. There was no turning back now. That was a lesson in itself. Once you commit, you commit. So with the debate settled and the decision sealed, the whole mood in Medina shifted. The time for talking was over. It was time for action. A state of emergency was declared. Guards were immediately sent to the edges of the city to make sure no information leaked out. And to avoid an ambush, the prophet decided they would leave at the quietest, most unexpected time, midnight. And so, as this small Muslim army slipped out of Medina into the darkness, led by a prophet who had honored his people's choice over his own, they marched toward a battle that would test them to their absolute limits. And it leaves us with this question that still echoes today. In those crucial moments, when you're facing overwhelming odds, is leadership about being right, or is it about being resolute?